Heyo, what is up my sexy compadres? Welcome back to another Ever Crisis video. Today we are doing another Shuju Pool for the banner that came out last night. But before I get started on that, I just want to say that obviously I couldn't cover the Barrett Red banner that is still available right now. And I think that is a really good banner. Both Barrett and Red's weapons, the RV collar and electric cannon, are fantastic. So that's all I have to say about that. Let's get on to today's video. So we have the new banner with featured weapons for Tifa and Zack, and featured outfits as well for both of them. Of course, you can farm the event a bit easier if you grab some of these weapons. And yeah, let's jump into Zack's outfit first. It is pretty standard, honestly. Looks pretty decent. Glacier armor gives buff debuff and frostblade, which is 35% ability damage, as we all know by now. So nothing special. He just joins the growing group of people that have ice ability damage. Tifa's, on the other hand, is quite special. She has boost HP and buff debuff extension plus. So I almost got fooled by this, but don't be fooled. It is different to buff debuff extension. You can see a comparison on the bottom there. And let's get go a little bit deeper into this. Buff debuff, the standard one, affects the duration. So for example, let's use Pinwheel's ability. You can see the ice resistance decrease is 25 seconds. And if you have, say, level 2 buff debuff, that's 40%, means that the debuff will last, instead of 25 seconds, it'll last for 35 seconds. Then the extension plus is actually based on the extension. So if you cast the ability again on an enemy before the debuff expires, you will normally get 8 seconds extra on the debuff. But with the extension, you will get 13 seconds, 12.8. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. It affects the extension. And that is pretty much it. Pretty interesting outfit. Let's move on to Zack's weapon. Big old swing, and it is Pressure Ridge, which is really top tier in its physical attack stat. Not the best, but it's about second best, or along the same tier as the second best. It has R101, which I like to call weapons that have total R ability points of 101. And each character these days has about one weapon that does that. He also has a sigil boost and a pretty strong physical ice attack that lowers resistance bars. Tifa's Feathered Gloves, dropping a bit of a Kamehameha there. Her magic attack stat is okay, nothing crazy, honestly. But it is also an R101 weapon, so the total R ability points are 101. This is a pretty standard debuffing weapon, that it's kind of low damage, non-elemental, and then it debuffs magic defense. But it also raises her water ability damage, or yeah. So that's quite interesting. And the support materia is not only a sigil boost, but also an attack boost for water, which is pretty nice considering the ability itself is non-elemental. So these are the two weapons. Let's get into comparisons, as I always like to do, starting with Zack's weapon. And we are going to compare it to Rose Musket. These two weapons are very, very similar. As you can see, their primary stat is pretty much exactly the same, 660. They have very similar support materia, where they each have a sigil boost. Zack's weapon has more R ability points in the R1. And as far as the ability goes, they are very, very similar. The one lowers magic defense, and the other one lowers ice resistance. But other than that, they're both 620% elemental damage. I'm also going to do a quick comparison with Thunderbird and Gold Megaphone, just so that we can get a little more information, a little more comparisons to see how this weapon stacks up. So against Thunderbird, Thunderbird's primary stats is obviously higher because it is the highest in the game for primary stats, and Zack's weapon is a close second. As far as support materia, they both have sigil boosts, and for R abilities, they both have R101, so 101 total points. It is the ability that is a bit different. Zack's does a bit more damage than the Thunderbird, and it has a condition to have its ice resistance debuff, whereas Lucia's Thunderbird does not have a condition, but Lucia's Thunderbird starts off at mid and goes up to high, whereas when maxed out, Zack's weapon starts off straight at high potency. So very comparable. Gold Megaphone, Zack's weapon's primary stat is much better, but Ketchi's is more spread out. It has a sigil boost, Zack's weapon, whereas Ketchi's does not, and it has more R1 ability points. As for the actual ability, Zack's does more damage, and it's elemental, which is a pretty big deal compared to the non-elemental from Ketchi. And then Ketchi just has that little extra if you crit, and that is situational, it's RNG. So overall, I would say this new weapon from Zack is actually a lot better than the Gold Megaphone, for example. Next up, Tifa's weapon. I'm going to be comparing it to Gold Megaphone again, and then also Radiant Edge and Electro Cannon. So against the Gold Megaphone, you can see the primary stat is much higher, and the so-called secondary stats is actually quite similar, so much better in stats. It has a much bigger R1 again, so a lot more R ability points in total. And for the support materia, they both have sigil boosts, but Tifa's weapon actually has an attack boost for water, so it wins out there in my opinion. And then finally for the abilities, Ketchi does a little bit more damage with his, and it is fire resistance down versus magic defense down. And then Tifa's Feather Gloves and Sephiroth's Radiant Edge are actually super comparable. Radiant Edge has more primary stat points. They have the same amount of R ability points, and they have pretty much exactly the same support materia, except obviously one is water, the other is fire. As for the weapons abilities, Sephiroth does a bit more damage, and his lowers physical defense by mid to mid, and Tifa's is magic defense by mid to mid. And then Sephiroth's lowers fire resistance by high potency at max, and Tifa's is water damage increase. Against Electro Cannon has a higher primary stat, and it is 101 total ability points, R ability points versus 98, so very close there. Obviously Tifa's has the water attack boost, they both have sigils, and then Tifa's ability lowers magic defense, whereas Barrett's is more damage, it is elemental, it is AoE, and it lowers physical attack. And Tifa's optional thing, or added bonus should I say, is a water resistance increase, whereas Barrett's is a magic attack decrease. So I would say Barrett's weapon is actually better. Overall, for Zack's weapon, it is a very good weapon. Obviously his outfit complements the weapon, which couldn't really be said in the past. It has an instant level 8 ice potency boost if you use it with Defender as the secondary weapon, and it is his second R101 weapon next to Black Whiskers, so the second weapon that gives him 101 total R ability points. And then it is an ice debuffing weapon with actual ice damage, which is really nice, because generally recently in the past the elemental debuffing weapons actually had non-elemental damage. And then it has a top tier physical attack stat. So as I said, overall it is a very good weapon. Yeah, the 101 R ability points is very nice. Makes it a good main weapon, secondary weapon, or sub weapon, so it's quite versatile in that regard. And as I said, things like Radiant Edge, Pinwheel, all of these kind of elemental debuffing weapons, they are all non-elemental damage, which makes them kind of weak, whereas this weapon deals actual ice damage while debuffing ice. So the reasons to pull for this weapon is if you somehow don't have an ice setup yet, and there's been so many ice weapons that you really should by now. And also if you use multiple characters for the same outcome. So for example, like I use Yuffie's Pinwheel to lower ice resistance, to debuff that. and then I use Sephiroth to do actual ice damage. Whereas instead of bringing those two characters, you could bring just Zack with this weapon, and you could both debuff ice and do ice damage. So that's really nice. And then of course, as mentioned, the level 8 ice potency if you use this as the main weapon and Defender as the secondary weapon, and that opens up your sub-weapons to do whatever you please. For Tifa's weapon, there's a lot to talk about. It is a very good weapon. It does actually have an average magic attack stat. That doesn't make it bad, but it's just not top 1, top 2 tier. The outfit, just like Zack's, complements the weapon, so it debuffs and buffs, so you get more with the duration increases, etc. And then it is also her second R101 weapon next to her crystal gloves. Other than that, it has a classic debuff ability. So the classic, by that I mean it deals non-elemental damage, not too much damage, but then it debuffs for an element. But then on top of that, it has a unique elemental DPS buff. So that buffs your water ability damage. And as far as I know, that is the first of its kind. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm blanking out on something, but this is the first weapon that actually raises an elemental damage. Apart from, of course, the summon, the duo summons, Ifrit and Bahamut, they raise your fire damage. But as far as weapons go, I think this is the only one that does that. Also, it combos very nicely with Black Whiskers because that lowers water resistance and this raises water damage. So that'll be a very good water setup. Finally, it somewhat overcomes elemental immunity because, as I'm sure you've noticed, in some Crisis dungeons, event rankings, or just random enemies, some of them will have resistance to certain debuffs, and there might be enemies that are resistant to debuffing their water resistance, for example. They're immune to that. And this overcomes that in a certain way, because instead of debuffing the enemy that is immune to it, you can just raise your own water ability damage, and that way you can still do a lot more water damage. And yeah, that is pretty much it. So I hope you have very good luck on your pulls if you choose to pull for these weapons. And thank you so much for watching. As always, have a fantastic day or night, and see ya.